Good afternoon. This is the Curriculum Committee on April 20th. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Roll call, we have Joan Ensign in place of Judy Ingebretson, and Ted Fry and myself are here. So approval of the agenda with a flip-flop in the presentation in number 5.
Move approval of the agenda with that adjustment.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Public comments?
None today. I mean, we did have that communication from a member of the public earlier.
Which I think we could, we're going to bring up some later in the agenda.
Yeah, we can touch on
in
the
conjunction with the
topic.
textbooks or
Yeah.
something. Yeah, very good. Okay, so the next agenda item then is redefining ready.
You got it.
Thank you, Mark. And Michelle McGlynn is here joining us because she has been instrumental in our work in this area. If you could, Rebecca, go down to the bottom attachment, the April 22 overview. That's a brief slide deck. And, you know, I want to start by giving a heap of thanks to Michelle for her hard work, as well as some others that have been working with her at the high school to make this possible. Redefining Ready is a national initiative, and it is a major point of focus among many Wisconsin schools. And so what we have here are some examples of our work on this today, and also some information, and I will freely admit that I borrowed this from our state leadership. Not a lot of this is original content, but why reinvent the wheel? So Redefining Ready in Wisconsin, it's, as you can see down here, it's a project that involves really all of the CISAs in the state. And nationally, its sponsorship comes under the National Association of School Administrators. And you can see that in state we have the sponsorship of the Wisconsin Association of School District Administrators. That's Randy's professional organization. You can move ahead to the next slide, please, Rebecca. So the premise of Redefining Ready is the end product is to provide a scorecard for boards and stakeholders in the community around indicators of college and career readiness. And again, this goes beyond any one state's state report cards. This is really a national piece. It started with a high school focus. There are middle school and elementary versions of Redefining Ready scorecards, but for our purposes here in Waunakee, like most districts in Wisconsin, we're starting with the high school focus. So next slide, please. So again, the Redefining initiative, nationally, the focus is to produce research-based metrics, a little more on that later. It's also designed to give a bigger picture of school performance than sometimes we see on state report cards, which from a public relations perspective for school districts, I think allows us to tell a more complete story to our public. And as an alternative to state report cards, hopefully influence the conversation around what states do in this area. Next slide, please, Rebecca. So what happened nationally, and this really began approximately 10 years ago and has grown in the ensuing decade, is the American Association of School Administrators, again, that's the National Superintendents Association, looked at research on what are some fairly easy, not always totally easy, right, Michelle? Pieces of data that we can glean from our system, and how do they relate to long-term success for kids? Next slide, please. And so we are bringing this in today because this was last before this committee a little more than 2 years ago in February 2020. And at that time, this committee endorsed us going ahead with a local Redefining Ready project. But as we know, there was something right around the corner in February of 2020. And I will say that while our progress has been slowed some by the impacts of the pandemic, this is one of the things we've been able to keep moving. And I really can't thank the high school team and Michelle in particular for making that possible. So what we're trying to do today is to reconnect with you as the curriculum committee on this project. Michelle has been working on a draft scorecard. It's not completely final, but it's I would say a late draft, and we're excited to share it with you, and then answer any questions you have on the project. Next slide, please. So again, this is kind of the state's vision for high school graduates in Wisconsin, that they, our kids, not only here in Waunakee, but in schools across the state, complete their high school education prepared with the knowledge, skills, and habits to be successful both for college and career. And as part of this, next slide, please, for Redefining Ready, there are a set of college and career readiness indicators. If you want to do a deeper dive than we have today, and again, Michelle and I are happy to answer questions, this is the website to go to. This is the national website. It may answer a lot of your questions if there are things we can't help you out with. If you go on to the next slide, please, Rebecca. I think the key point is, from AASA's perspective, the data that's being highlighted on the Redefining Ready scorecard are indicators that the evidence base on post-secondary success correlates strongly with long-term positive outcomes for kids. And so this includes performance on kind of advanced coursework like AP, dual credit courses. It also involves mathematics progress. That is often a key fork in the road for kids when they leave high school and move on to technical fields or college. The percent of kids with a certain GPA level, in this case 2.8, and also what percent of your high school graduates are completing at least Algebra 2. And again, these all have an evidence base behind them. And then we talked about the sum at our community engagement session earlier this academic year on academic progress of our kids. We have outcomes on the ACT, including the at or above benchmark on all 4 indicators. There are other things that contribute to this. These are not all on the scorecard. Next, please. And when we look at career ready indicators, there are other pieces as well. So how are we doing in terms of our students having a 90% attendance rate? Are our students completing 25 hours of community service? Do they have workplace learning experiences, industry credentials, 2 or more organized co-curricular activities? These are things, if you're familiar with high school programs, we really try to encourage kids to participate in. You're actually going to hear about some very aligned activities in a little bit from Sandra and Jason, and you can see how this folds right into this vision of prepared graduates. And just to the next one, Rebecca, I think we are close to the end. So in the literature, and the literature, if you want to actually see the studies, they will be referenced on that national site. Course attendance is more predictive of success in the first year of college than your 8th grade test scores. Students who have successfully completed Algebra 2 in high school are twice as likely to complete a 4-year degree. Students with a 2.8 GPA graduating high school have a 71% likelihood of reaching the types of career fields that would place you in a middle-class lifestyle. Co-curriculars are aligned with higher education. Community service, we have found in the research base, enhances your likelihood of completing college. And again, students who participate in advanced placement courses or international baccalaureate courses, and we don't offer IB here at Waunakee. There are Madison Country Day does offer IB here in Dane County, more likely to persist in 4- and 2-year colleges. And likewise, students who take dual enrollment courses. So Sandra teaches a marketing course that's articulated with Madison College. Students who complete that course with Sandra are statistically more likely to have successful outcomes, whether they go on to Madison College or a four-year institution. Next slide. I think this might be our final. And again, it's just the final slide. So we wanted to kind of reintroduce the concept. It has been just 2 years ago, but a lot has happened in the 2 years. The reason why I believe you approved it 2 years ago was, again, the things that Redefining Ready measures, add information beyond what we see on the state accountability report cards, and they're aligned to student success post-high school. And the other thing is, this is a national initiative. And once we have a Redefining Ready scorecard, our Redefining Ready scorecard will cover most or all of the same indicators that an Illinois district or a Georgia district who's in Redefining Ready has. So for families looking at our school district, if they have Redefining Ready in their area, it gives them a point of reference that crosses state lines. And I think I'll pause for some questions before I ask Michelle to take her turn and share our draft with us.
Any questions from the committee? I found it interesting reading the different samples, which I don't know if we're going to get to those or not, but the metrics that they came up with, some seemed a little lower than I thought. But within our own school district, right now, the service opportunities are strictly voluntary. It's not required. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and is there a thought of moving that into a requirement or for graduation or not?
So not right now. I think it's an interesting conversation to have. I mean, obviously we can see it's important, and we certainly encourage our students to participate in it. I think the old debate has been the benefits that accrue from service learning come when you choose to participate in it. Now sometimes you're in an activity and it's part of the activity, so it's not completely an individual choice, but there is a school of thought that if you mandate service learning, is it truly, you lose some of the impact because it's required. So this is just something that we're tracking as part of the report of the Redefining Ready.
I just aware that some schools use some of the holidays, like Martin Luther King as an example, for service activities, and I don't know if they're voluntary or required, but it's just a thought. Okay, and the other question, I'm assuming we have multiple opportunities for certification for our various courses.
In fact, Rebecca, why don't you bring up the draft Redefining Ready scorecard, the one above that, for Waunakee High School, and Michelle can walk us through it and maybe share a little bit with us how the data, some of this, I think the data collection is obvious, some of it isn't, and if you could sketch us in on that.
Sure. So when Tim and I first attended, I think that there are school districts that are in year 3 at this point, and we're in year 1, and so we're coming in as the 3rd year. So with this program, we've got a bucket of districts who started 3 years ago, some that started 2 years ago, and then we're part of a cohort that started this last summer. And so we did over the summer some meetings, and so this was kind of all outlined to us. And at the time, the first indicator for the attendance rate, they really focused in on the fact that this was freshman year, because they truly believe that freshman year, if you've got that 90% attendance rate, that does set the stage for student success as they go through high school. I think they're now thinking maybe it's easier to track at senior level. So the thing that you want to remember with all of these metrics and all of the percentages that are up here, this is only for our class of 2022. So these numbers are a reflection of what our current students who are seniors have done throughout the last 4 years. So the attendance rate that we pulled, that would have been from this year's senior class, their freshman year. And so it shows that 95% of that class freshman year was at 90% or higher attendance rates. So we will have to relook if Wisconsin decides to change the metric to look at senior year versus freshman year, we'll have to adjust that. But we did look at freshman year based on their recommendation at that point. GPA, obviously, we just pulled some of that data from Infinite Campus. Again, class of 2022, we've got 76% of our students who are at a 2.8 or higher GPA right now at this time, and this would have been pulled after first semester senior year. So we waited till they had obviously 3.5 years of high school under their belt before we pulled their GPA. That wouldn't include this current semester if some of those students are close, but not quite there. Then we have advanced placement. And Mark, you brought up an interesting point in looking at some of the other scorecards. And I was talking to Tim a little bit before this meeting. One of the things I noticed, because I wanted to do like we all do with data, want to compare this school district to that school district. Obviously, I pulled Oregon because they're one of the few schools in Dane County who have been in this for 3 years now. So they have things established. But what I noticed is that the way they were calculating out their metrics is a little bit different than what we did, because they were looking at more like what was their percent enrollment in maybe a dual credit course. So maybe 30% of their seniors were in a dual credit course. I took it a step further to not only how many are in it, but out of that 30% that were in it, how many of them are achieving the C or higher, or how many of them are earning a 3 or higher on an AP exam. So I really pulled a subset out of only the students who are doing it and then where they're at on that metric. So for the advanced placement, I did pull out all of our students, and I went back all 4 years. We certainly have students who are gifted, who at sophomore level, we obviously have APUSH as an AP class at that point, but we certainly have students at the sophomore level who are in some of our AP classes as well. And so I went back all 4 years. We pulled all of the AP data for this current year's seniors. And out of all of the students who took an AP class over the last 4 years, 67% of them have scored a C or higher in that AP class, and 75% of them scored a 3 or higher on the AP exam, which really was interesting to me to think that we had a lower percentage of students earning the grade in the class than we did the higher amount that actually went and took the AP exam and scored that 3 or higher, which is the benchmark for getting your AP credits. So that was for this year's seniors too. Yeah.
The percent for the exam is that, that's with the 3+?
Yeah, so they had to earn a 3, 4, or 5.
Because that's the only one that translates into college credit,
Correct.
correct?
Yep. Nobody usually looks at the 1 or 2. And there are certain schools who are definitely only look at a 4 or 5. But 3 is kind of that general standard mark. Advanced algebra, again, went back through. Some students are taking advanced algebra as freshmen. Some are taking it junior year. It just depends. But looking at this year's class, 82% of them have received a C or higher in Algebra 2. Industry recognized credentials in work-based learning. So this is kind of my cup of tea here. And of course, this was an easy data for me to pull because I do keep track of all of this. And I did go back because I did have all the data already. So it was an easy one to do, but I wanted to do a comparison. In 19 and 20, that graduating class earned a total of 117 industry recognized credentials. That may have been, it could have been one student who earned, I'll just use Ted's son, for example, he may have earned 2 Microsoft Office certifications in his business classes. So I would have counted that as 2. When we do the grant for the state, they only count 1 per student. So it doesn't matter if a student earned 4 or 5, they only get counted as a student. So I wanted to do it total credentials earned, because I do think that it's important to note that the student who earned a Microsoft certification may have also earned their certified nursing assistant. And I think that it's really important to recognize that students do earn multiple certifications. So in 2021, we had 110 total earned. And as of first semester of 21-22, we have 84. So we're certainly on track to still be well over 100 total certifications for this current senior class. For work-based learning participation, the things that I looked at were employability skills, which students can get release time for, our co-op program for childcare, our youth apprenticeship program, Kokapelli work, because again, the state does look at that as a career-based kind of learning experience, even though it might not be paid, they are earning school credit for it. And I also included Sandy's students who work in the school-based enterprise, our Warrior Corner store, because again, they're getting school credit for it. They are learning about business, and it really is a career-based learning experience. So out of this year's class, we had 34% of our students who were part of a work-based learning program. Not all was paid, but they were part in getting some of that career experience. Then going over to ACT scores, this one was a fun piece of data to pull. So first of all, I had to pull the data on how many students met all 4 benchmarks, and then I broke it down by subset of each test. So all benchmarks, 47% of our students, so nearly half of our students who took the ACT test met all 4 benchmarks. Our English benchmark is an 18 or higher. The math benchmark is a 22 or higher. Reading is 22 or higher, and science is 23 or higher. And so you can see for English, we had almost 70% of our students met the English benchmark, 54% math, 61 reading, and 58 science. I noticed some of the school districts, when they were looking at this, they were looking at composite scores, and they might have said a certain percentage had a composite score of 21 or higher. That is a little misleading because, again, you might have been really high in science and met that benchmark, but really low in math. And I think what the state and the national associations are looking at is kind of that all around. And so that's why I wanted to do it really kind of according to how they laid it out, because I thought that was a little bit better data. Co-curricular activities each year, I started the fall with begging all of my advisors, coaches, everybody to put all of the data in Infinite Campus so that we had a really good representation of what students were participating in all of our organizations, sports, clubs, all of the stuff that school sponsored. And our end result was 77% of our students are enrolled in at least one co-curricular activity a year, which I think is a really nice percentage. I would like to see 100 because I do think that it means a lot for students to join and be part of something, so that's something that we'll continually work on. Dual enrollment, they break it out onto English or math. So for our sake, Madison College, we have our math class, our senior mathematical reasoning that's dual credited. And then we have a few random students who will take like our Start College Now credits through Madison College or through UW-Madison. And so I incorporated that data in with our own students who take senior mathematical reasoning. 97% of the students who are taking a dual enrollment English or math class are earning a C or higher. And 98% of our students who are enrolled in a career pathway dual credit class are earning a C or higher. And I really think that is a huge representation of an accolade to our dual credit teachers, that high of a percentage of our students are earning that C or higher. And on the following page that you'll see in a moment, I have all of our dual credit pathway classes listed that are career pathway 1. So we have accounting 1, biotech career apps, biotechnology, French 5, marketing 1, medical terminology, metal fabrication, MS Excel and Access, MS Office Advanced, Spanish 5 and Spanish 6, welding, and then of course our Start College Now and early college credit program classes. So there's a lot of data to pull. We have a lot of students in our CAP classes with UW-Oshkosh. So that is a representation of those world language classes as well. So that's a really good percentage. And then the last one, we don't have a percentage yet. Our service hours, as Mark alluded to, it's not a requirement. So this was going to be the hardest one for me to, how am I going to get this data? And so for this year, what I settled on was we use the program called Naviance for students to do all of the scholarships and register information on what they do when they graduate. We have them do an exit survey that we require they do before they graduate, and we're incorporating a service hour question there. Because honestly, if it's not a requirement, it is the honor system for them to self-report. And so I'm going to break it up by like, did you do 1 to 10? Did you do 11 to 20? And just let them self-report, and then we'll see where we're at for this year's graduating class. And then for future years, we're kind of open for what might work. It might be advisories and having students self-report. But again, it is going to have to all be honor system, because there is no way to gather all of that data with, I know the school districts that do require it sometimes have a sheet that has to be signed. That seems like with 1,400 students in the high school, that's not something I have time to collect and to data look at. So anyway, so we'll figure out a good way of reporting that, but that will show up after we do that senior survey. I'll have some data for that. And then the second page, I really just threw together what all of this means and what we used for data pull and what benchmarks we were looking at, and then specifically what Waunakee offers. So whether it's work-based learning, Mark, you asked about industry credentials. I think I captured all of them, but we have the marketing certifications, we have business certifications like for finance and entrepreneurship. We have our assistant childcare teacher. The students who are in Amy Neitzel's childcare 2 class earn that. We have certified nursing assistants. I pay for students to take those classes year round. We had a student this year, actually 2 students who did the emergency medical tech through Madison College. It's like a 5-credit class that they completed that. We also had a student do firefighter 1 and 2 and got certification for that, which was awesome. We have our Microsoft Office specialist. We have OSHA 10 for our construction students. And then I have, as I mentioned, the childcare co-op and youth apprenticeships. And I already mentioned the dual credit classes. So I wanted to just explain that on that second page. So if we do end up posting this online, obviously we'll have to revamp I'll have to redo the logo and all of that stuff. But if this was online, it would give at least whoever's reading it an indication on what we looked at specifically. So questions that you have?
Well, I'd just like to thank you for your hard work. Also, viewing the other schools, I really like the format you have. It's very readable. It stands up. It's not cluttered like some of them are just jam-packed with
Thank
info.
you.
You have a nice balance of info and space.
Thanks.
I think it's a chart that's really easy to read.
Thank you. And as I mentioned to Tim, so the top part, Rebecca, if you'll scroll back up really quick, the top part then, as Tim mentioned before, up way at the top right corner, what we will ultimately look at is what percentage of our students can we identify as college ready and what percentage are career ready. And that's by looking at one or more metrics on each side. And so when I do that, I can't really do it just by looking at the data. I have to do it per individual student. So I have a spreadsheet of all of our seniors and I really have to say, okay, it's a yes on the GPA, and then is it a yes for ACT? Is it a yes for AP classes? So I need to have 2 yeses somewhere. And so I need to do that in order to come up with those percentages. So that's going to take me a little bit more time, but at least I have overall with the graduating class that data pulled just by numbers.
And some of these things over time, we may be able to create a dashboard in EduClimber that would assist with the calculations. But as you can tell from what Michelle has shared, there's some areas here where we don't have a standardized data collection, like for service learning. So we need to work at that foundational level before we move to that next phase.
So if people are comparing, like you were mentioning, you could compare across the different states, Illinois, whatever. It's it's not apples to apples necessarily, but it's close.
I would say it's close. And I think my biggest concern is that school districts, what I fear is that some of them are interpreting what the metrics are, and they're trying to report their numbers so they maybe they look better. So for example, I mean, just case in point, and I'm not slamming another school district, but one of the report cards we looked at, which was another district in Dane County that will go unnamed, but it's linked here. They used as their baseline the total amount of students in their graduating class for everything, which really is a little misleading because I did not include the students who didn't take an AP class in that metric, because to me, I'm reporting the score of the students who took it, or the students who took advanced algebra. Certainly not all students take advanced algebra. There's not a lot that don't, but there are a few. And to me, they should not be counted as a no that we didn't meet that metric because they didn't take the class.
But when you read this, how does that percent indicate? So for attendance, that is a percentage of everybody possible.
Correct.
For GPA is everybody
Correct.
possible. But when you get to advanced placement, when I first read that, I didn't know I would only be using people who took a class.
Sure.
So I don't know if there's a way to include a little verbiage so that when you look at that 67%, Is it?
What does it mean?
It's an
What does
indicator
it
of a
mean?
subset.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
What is the subset that percentage?
Yep.
For me, that would help indicate
Yep.
what the percentage is,
Yep.
a little bit of a.
I agree. And so that's something that we can certainly, I can add on there. And some districts are putting like the total number somewhere by
Yeah.
in one of these
I'll
things.
know.
Right,
Right.
right. And so I think that you bring up a really good point that for me, as I'm looking at it, I understand it because I pulled the data, but for
Right.
someone else, it
I
is,
didn't
needs to
read
be
it the way
explanatory.
you explained it.
Mhm.
I read it at home and I go, oh, and then you explain it, I go, oh, that's not what it is.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, that absolutely can be added. So we can customize. That's the nice thing about, I think, this whole project is that what we have for a report card, that's completely customizable on how we want it. Some districts have 10 pages of stuff on their website. I think it's a lot to go through.
Yeah.
So I would like to keep it to the 2 pages. I think it's a quick and easy thing to look at.
Can I ask you on the GPA, is that total student body again, or is that the senior?
That's total student body for the graduating class.
So one
the
class.
GPA.
So it's just one.
So 9 through
class.
12.
So this
No,
year's
no,
seniors.
this year's
right? So
seniors.
Cumulative GPA, seniors, but only our graduating classes.
So we're only looking at seniors. So for the
Got it.
attendance
Okay.
rate, it's a
Yeah.
little weird because it's when they were freshmen, but it's still the same kids. With the exception of those who've moved out and on.
What do you think the logic is on the freshmen, just because you are more scheduled in regular stuff, and when you get up to the higher ones, you have.
That, and I think once you get to the higher levels, you also have some work-based learning
Right,
pieces
that's
where
what I mean,
people,
yeah.
right, are leaving, they have releases. And so I
Yep.
think that can sometimes skew the data. So I think their purpose, and I'm just interpreting it, is that freshman level, they're just getting started. Like this is where if they have good attendance at freshman year, the likelihood that they're going to continue having good attendance by senior year is probably more likely.
Seems like really old data. I mean, it's,
Agreed.
Yeah.
And again, because a lot of the students, I'm not comparing like for like, because we may have 10 students who were here their freshman year, part of that graduating class that the data shows, but they're no longer here as seniors. They're at other school districts. So I think that's part of the reason why they are looking at maybe we should have all of the data pulled from the current year for the current seniors to make it easier to manage.
And there's a state steering committee that does look at making refinements to the Wisconsin model for redefining ready. You know, we're in their 3rd cohort, our 1st year with it, so we are not on the steering committee. But I know that, you know, we've seen some email communication that they are going to be looking at some of the indicators that there may or may not be some adjustments for it.
So will this factor into the state report card?
So this is designed to complement the state report
Okay.
card. I mean, the state report card has come a long way in terms of providing more recognition to the arts and to career pathways. However, this still gets into areas that are not reflected on the state report card. So this is really designed to complement that. And again, this is part of a national initiative. This is not a state only. And we still have to participate in the state report card process.
The layout is really nice.
Thank you.
When I looked at the other ones, it's just linear.
Yeah.
It's my brain.
My business, my business formatting.
Yeah.
Any other questions from me?
So we'll get this finalized. We'll bring back the final version, but we wanted to reconnect with you at this stage of the process. And thank you for your feedback and attention. And again, Michelle and others at the high school have been working tremendously hard to get us to where we are. So thank you very much.
Great work. Thank you.
We're just talking about the importance of, work-based opportunities and development for our kids. And we're really lucky to have Sandra and Jason with us today. You probably know Jason McConnell and Sandra Meinholz, but Sandra's our marketing teacher at the high school, and Jason's in ELA, and he is our digital media guru. So Warrior Media is with us here. And as you know, as part of our work with Warrior Media, the digital marketing class, the digital media class, also for our longer term pieces with Warrior Stadium, there has been an advertising and sponsorship component to this work. And so this is newer area for us. And because of the work that the digital media classes been undertaking, and it was kind of put on a turbocharger with the pandemic as we moved, saw more viewership move to the streaming format. We now are looking at sponsor placements that go beyond like the fence and the scoreboard to actually what's you watch our stream, and all of a sudden, how do we handle that? And I know this was a question, Ted, as policy committee chair, this had come up before policy, and the thinking was, well, this crosses a lot of committees, but it really reflects on the work the sports marketing class does and the digital media class does. So let's bring an update in here. And so Randy and I met with Jason and Sandra about 2 weeks ago, and I think they're gonna walk you through what our kids are doing. But I think the key thing to know from your perspective as a board is that really the role of the kids is to staff this. I mean, obviously they're producing the media, but from the standpoint of advertising, they are developing deliverables to share with potential sponsors about what is possible. They're providing the creative genius behind this in many cases. But in terms of the actual direct sales piece, that's handled by adult staff. And particularly in the athletic area, that's going to kind of come back to Aaron's office and our business office. It's not going to be the case, really, the kids are going to be having the direct contact with potential sponsors. They're working on the creative products and advertising what's possible. So Sandra and Jason, I'll pick it off to you.
Sure, I go first. You can kind of think of it like the adults are stoking the fire, the kids are roasting hot dogs and then hanging hot dogs out. So when we got the video board that stated back in 2017, one of the big things was that eventually we would get to the point where we would be selling sponsorships, and it would be creating funding for especially things like my class, where my class is way beyond the $200 classroom budget. Normally I burn that in one camera cord, that kind of thing. So being able to find a way to support that and upgrading equipment, getting the equipment we need. Technology is super expensive. So finding a way to do that. And then also being able to incorporate kind of our classes working together with sports marketing and with my digital comm, where basically her kids would sell the sponsorships and then we would build the content that would coordinate with those sponsorships. So a lot of other schools, we kind of borrowed ideas from Muskego, Southern Door, and then there's another one somewhere, Millica, as well as some other schools around the nation. As far as what they do, and some other schools kind of started this like right out of the gate, and we kind of had I think it was 9 sponsors total that kind of had the ownership or monopoly of the board for 4 or 5 years. I think we gave them a bonus year because of COVID, and all those contracts expire. And so now, if other businesses in town, I'll use Quick Trip as an example, wanted to advertise on the board, or they wanted to advertise potentially on the live stream, they would now be able to, because those other contracts have or will expire coming up. So with the kind of catalyst of the live stream kind of blowing up and taking off right away, faster than we anticipated, especially with COVID, we're now at a point where live streaming is big. Like a lot of schools are doing live streaming. Our live stream has taken off. 80,000 views. We're approaching 49 states and 15 countries, and it's like everywhere. So being able to, knowing that we have a very large audience that we're looking at from each event, and people asking, can we advertise, can we sponsor? There's a lot of interest in the community of being able to have a Rocky Coco's logo pop up on Scorebug, or have a thank you to our sponsors, and list off all the sponsors there, or even have a commercial like we have right now. We have Carlos Stotts and some of the Culvers have commercials at halftime of our football games, and the process and the other stuff. Having the opportunity for a local business or a big business, even something like AmFam, to be able to advertise 30-second commercial, kind of things during the games, and then finding ways to sponsor equipment, build up a a pool of money over time, and then trying to figure out how we split that up and so on and so forth. So that's kind of where it started, and we've kind of built the idea, brought it in for a couple of things. We're just trying to figure out, basically what you'd like us to do, as far as being able to have deliverables for businesses, so we don't promise the moon and not be able to cash it. Like, whoa, like, what are we doing? And so being able to kind of know, like, this is what we're able to offer you, and this is kind of the turnaround, and so on and so forth.
So Jason, just in the football stadium, how many sponsors can you fit into one event?
More than you think. Right now we only have 9.
Okay.
And it really kind of depends on what kind of advertisement they have.
Sure.
So it could be everything from a PA read, where at one point, 15 minutes before the game, I read, at this time, we'd like to thank our sponsors for the evening, and list it all off in a minute, and you get 30, 40 people. Some of it could be what we have now on the video board, which is the sponsor logos. So a lot of them run throughout the game. So we have what I call the pregame roll, and it rolls with other announcements throughout the pregame that people are walking in. You could have, for example, one of our equipment packages that we'd like to offer is for our live stream kids, we have cameras on the field. And we discovered real quick in October, so we didn't have to worry about it with spring football because it got nicer. The weather got worse as we went into the fall, where the kids are bringing in their own canopy tents to protect the equipment, because they're $4,000 or $5,000 cameras that we like not to get wet. So we put they brought in their own canopy tents, and it was just out of the blue where they're like, hey, we should do this like for each camera. And so that was one of the things that they kind of came up with. Like, it'd be really nice to have kind of like a little house, like a 3-sided canopy tent, where we have the one open end, say at the one end of the end zone, and we've got everything protected from the rain and snow. We can still get the shot we want. We have it in each of the end zones, and it keeps them warm a little bit. But that also could have like our Warrior Media logo on one side, but it should also have, say, Culver's logo on a side, or whoever it was. And we actually found a company in Minnesota that has a quick turnaround to make that really fast. So just little things like that. So it could be something a little more visible. It could be a commercial. Not all businesses have commercials, or make commercials. But it could also be something where potentially a signage along the fence. There's a lot of, so there's a ton of different ways to advertise. It really kind of depends on, one, how much they're donating, and two, what kind of advertisement they would like in return for their donation. So if you got somebody, say AmFam donates $20,000, potentially looking at a commercial versus just a little PA read, versus maybe a company that we can only give $500.
Yeah.
So give them a little PA read, we throw the logo up on the board, something like that, where we would be able to figure out whether it was tiers or influencers.
This Badger Large Standings update is brought to you by
Exactly.
X.
And sponsoring, eventually getting to the point where maybe they're sponsoring content. So like tonight's starting lineups brought to you by Quick Trip, or it could be social media stuff where we post final scores for a lot of the sports we stream. So you put soccer score 4-2, and there's a little Quick Trip logo at the bottom, something like that. It's something super simple, but something that would get their name out there. And a lot of these sponsorships, especially talking to some of the other schools that we have, a lot of it is they don't necessarily sponsor the money for money's sake to be, okay, look at us, look how much we gave. It's more of, hey, we're part of this whole thing. It's that name recognition kind of thing where you just see the logo. It's like, oh, hey, that's nice. They're sponsoring that. They're sponsoring that. So a little bit more of that kind of name recognition. It's out there.
Jason and I have kind of brainstormed a little bit. So, we have this segment of like what's called in-kind sponsorship. So somebody that wanted to maybe sponsor a camera and then have the logo on the side of the camera. Maybe we would have like a general donation, have different tiers, like, the purple tier, the silver tier, the gold tier, if we wanted to go that depth, that deep into it. And then, you would have these different options, like maybe you have an equipment company that says, we're going to provide the camera for you. We're not going to give you the money. We'll give you the camera, right? Which again, could be something that's specific to their business. So thinking local, but also thinking bigger, like UW Health, American Family, bigger companies like that, that a lot of our students' parents work at. So we could still support and kind of, build that into the community as well. I have a lot of stuff up there. I guess the big thing that I'm going to talk about before I have you start pulling up some things is right now my students have started doing what's called a market evaluation. And this isn't a document that we have up there, but it's them like describing our facility. It's getting that spec sheet. Like, here's a picture of where your stadium, here's a picture of the field house. This is where your logo could be. This is where, you would be visible. And so they're looking at like maximum seating capacity. We're looking at how many people, how many imprints would they see? How many times would somebody see their logo? Season tickets. We have a lot of information with GoFan now that we can pull out and say, okay, this many people came to this game. Jason has specific numbers, and I'm just going to use this.
Does everybody know what GoFan is? So GoFan is our electronic ticketing system now. So a lot more data, more easily accessed.
Right. Nobody's physically counting, it automatically does it for you. Jason has, and I can let him allude to this if I don't say it right, but when he looks at like the live stream for football, there were, for the 2021-2022 school year, there were 24,443, I don't want to say hits, but like viewers, yeah. And so if you logged on for 5 minutes or you stayed for the whole game, you were counted as one viewer. And I think that's really great data to put into our market evaluation when we're putting together numbers and putting together some sort of a package that says, why do you want to sponsor with Waunakee? This is why. Here's all the people that tune in. Here's all the people that come to the game. These are some of the non-athletic events that we have. And so my students are currently digging into Nielsen Nielsen rating service, which tells you how many people live in Waunakee, what are their age groups. This is stuff that I've been doing in Marketing 1 for years. And now they're like seeing why I taught that 2 years ago. They're like, wow, there's some really cool stuff out there. Nielsen compiles people into different groups. So like there's the red, white, and blue, and they have these fancy names, and then it gives you all their psychographic information, like what kind of car do they drive? How much money do they make? How many, what's their education? It's all free. It's all out there. And so that's stuff that we can provide.
It's all scary.
It's very scary. And that's the thing too that I'm trying to teach students is, your cell phone data, like somebody uses that information, how you use your cell phone, that's all in there. When you look at app companies that have companies that pay, they want to see the view. It's all about engagement, right? And so now they're starting to see, especially in the sports marketing class, like, okay, now I understand why you taught us all that before, because we're seeing the connection, we're applying it to something that's live. So that's what we're doing right now. Planned improvements to the facility, right? That's another component. Like these groups, these students are broken up into different groups. I have another group that's brainstorming a list of businesses that we could send this information out to, but they also need to provide the athletic office names and contact information, like phone numbers, emails, so that we're giving them everything. Like, here you go. These are the people that we think would be really great. This is the contact person. We've already gotten through the gatekeeper, right? This is the person that you want to talk to. This is their phone number and their email. So we started this last class, and it was like, this is like everybody was just buzzing. It was music to my ears.
It's the real deal.
It is. And I think that, I keep telling them, like, yes, you're a senior, and yes, you're going to move on, but you can come back here in 5 years and say, I was a part of that. That there's some pride to that. And we have that warrior pride. And so it's really great that they get to experience that, even if they're not in sports, right? They get an opportunity to say that they were a part of that. So where do we go from here? So there's a bunch of examples in there. I would say that the sponsorship packages examples, the very first document, this is one example, and we can rotate this, but this is Southern Door put together. This was all given to us by Daktronics. And this is these are like prospectuses that other people have used to try and sell. And these are different inventory levels, so we can get very specific as far as digital content and what we want to provide. the static signage, there's the print and promotions. Jason and I are on the same page with this, and that we want to start simple, right? We don't want to break it down into all these things that we can't promise or deliver, I should say. But this is one example. Southern Door put together a whole booklet of like, here's what our field house looks like. This is why you want to sponsor with us. Reasons, to sponsor. If you go to Muskego, that's the next, I don't think that's the next one, but this is one that Jason obtained for me. Does the same kind of thing where they talk about a little bit of information about the school, which I think is important to understand. You're a partner. We're not just looking for your money. We're working together. So here's some info, like here's our mission. Here's some exemplary things that we do well, using some of Michelle's data, maybe we could put in there. Reasons to partner, right? So there's lots of different things that Muskego has done. They have, I think is it the last page? They talk about, it's not the last page, money. So they have their, oh yes. So they have the Premier Partnership Package. They have a Founding Partnership Package. Again, you're gonna notice that they have some pretty high dollar amounts here. For Jason and I, we're not really sure what, I guess we're kind of hoping to walk away with what are we gonna put in as a number on those packages. We don't want to forget about the small business, the mom and pop businesses that maybe only wanna have $100. How are we gonna do that? How are we gonna break this out? Again, looking at those different tiers. An in-kind sponsorship would maybe be for a bigger business, one that has a little bit more money to spend, that wants to sponsor equipment or those tents, because that's going to give them a lot of visibility for people that are there, maybe not people that are live streaming, right? But that would be an option. So we're kind of hoping to get some guidance there. And then I guess if you could go to the Mallards example.
The bottom one.
This is what I'm going to help the students put together. So we had a past graduate from Waunakee who came in, who works for the Madison Mallards. She took both my Marketing 1 and my Marketing 2 class. Sports entertainment was not a class that was offered yet. And this is what they shared with us. What I would like to do is to create the background that has a theme to our new logo. If you keep scrolling, that right here, our new look. So this I thought would be really cool after watching Randy's webinar to talk a little bit about what our logo represents, what it means, because this fits perfect with exactly what we just went through as a district and our rebrand. And then talking about how, we're looking for new sponsors. We want you to be a part of us and what we have and what we represent. This is where we would put the data that the students are finding right now with the people who attend, the people who are live streaming. This would all be like a package deal. Like, here you go, here's all the information that you need to know. And I'd really like to kind of shadow this and get as much information as possible, and then put at the very end what our packages are, and the different tiers and the different levels. And my goal is to have this done by the end of May.
Very ambitious.
And we can do it because, again, a lot of the information is out there.
Sure.
It's going to entail me putting together through Canva. That's what they used for this program. And I would create the background with the logo. So obviously get that approved. Like, this is what we want to use. We would start plugging in the information. The kids would give me the information. They would put any, infographic type materials in here to make it visually appealing. We create a classroom where the kids can all work, and then they have the pro version. So they have a lot more from the educational side that we don't have to pay for. And then this could be sent out to any sponsor for, hey, this is why you should partner with us.
So this is what it looks like from the student and course piece. I mean, Sandra mentioned, we do have some other layers we need to put together. So the pricing here We need to think about what our financial targets are to sustain the digital communications class in Warrior Media, because that's not an inexpensive class. We have longer term requirements with the scoreboard at Warrior Stadium. We also, to the extent that we can, would like to have collaborative conversation with some of our boosters, because we do have some community projects where boosters are also, for major projects, doing some fundraising. And to the extent that we can, if there can be some consistency in what your sponsorship dollar can get you in different venues. And of course, sometimes we're talking very different things. Some things it's signage, sometimes it's signage to unique things that only can appear on the Warrior Media stream. So you're not going to have comparability in all cases, but we don't want, if we can help it, we don't want anybody selling themselves short. And, you know, we also want it not to be confusing to potential sponsors in the community. So there's some other conversations that need to happen outside of this group.
One of the other aspects too is, you know, I've had a lot of people ask me, mostly parents, but, you know, how can, you know, parents contribute, you know, if they want to donate stuff, or, you know, small businesses. So one other thing would be like a class community site or something where it's like, hey, if grandma and grandpa are up in Minneapolis and they watch all the streams, like, hey, we want to give $50, you know, to that, they could donate that. So a way too for those smaller donations to also,
Yes.
you know, and then maybe have like a, you know, you have like YouTube channels that have like Patreon or something where it's like, you know, you put out a list at the end of the live stream, let's say, like, here's our latest 50 donators or whatever, and just put a quick list or something like that just to thank everybody. Just little things where you're able to get that that publicity, or that the number of views, the number of eyes on that thing too, especially with the streams, because a lot of the, I mean, it varies from sport. We had the Menominee game, you know, and for football playoffs, we hit 14,000 views. You know, it's one of the biggest streams in the state. And then, you know, other sports are bringing in 1,000, 1,500, some are consistently 300, 400. So you're getting pretty consistent audiences throughout some different ones. So that may also determine where certain sponsorships, if a soccer parent has a business and they want to make sure that they have a commercial on during soccer or something to that effect, where they can kind of target where they want to sponsor. You know, that's a possibility to make sure that gets out.
That's cool. Where you were saying, you know, you're trying to figure out what the targets are in terms of dollar amounts and things like that. Is that something that could be incorporated in the class itself, or is that getting a little too deep on things? You know, like that could be a, you know, it's a whole topic on itself that would be quite on it.
I'm actually teaching that right now. We have a textbook and there's a chapter on sponsorship. But the problem is you can't really put a price tag on value, right? So there's no, like looking at some of these examples, you know, some of these schools are really expensive where other schools aren't as much. Madison Mallards kind of told us that they don't turn anybody away. They have a set amount, and if the business says, well, we want more, okay, what do you want? And then they just kind of adjust that price. We kept asking them lots of questions about price. They couldn't give us an answer. I think part of that is confidentiality and protecting their sponsors. But another part of that is it's not, there isn't like $1 amount. We don't want anybody to come in, like there is a booster club, and I'm not going to say which one, where they're selling ad space for a year for $150. Well, if I wanted to do that and it's along a main road, why wouldn't I do that when instead of spending $5,000 on, you know, a live stream sponsorship? We don't want to outprice ourselves, but we also don't want to undercut ourselves. And then we're struggling to keep going for the next 5 years or however long this sponsorship is. I think there's a lot of questions, like I can obviously help spearhead that conversation, but we just need more definitive answers as to, this is a 5-year contract. We have a $500 level, we have a $1,000 level or a $10,000 level or whatever we decide to do. I don't want to make it too complex, but we also need to make sure that that we can deliver what we promise.
So like, that's what I mean, there's real life business stuff going on here that.
Well,
you gotta
this
make
is
those
great
kind of
learning, this is
decisions,
great
you
learning
know?
for the kids.
I know, that's.
You know, I wasn't at the policy meeting, Ted, but I understand from Randy, we're starting the conversation here because one, we wanted to know how kids were involved, but also we wanted to understand, I think, more about the learning opportunities this offers
Yeah.
for kids. So,
I'm assuming whatever prices you decide on has to come to us for approval, like the user fees at the high school gym and that sort of thing, or swimming pool. I know with the swimming pool, they try to meet the Dane County average. They didn't want to be too far above it, that sort of thing, and so it's going to be an interesting task for you guys to, I mean, because you have different sized projects. I had two questions. One for Jason. Does a portion of the donation, whether it's 1% or whatever, go into your programs that are to help build and maintain what your capacity?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that we're looking at is trying to figure out. So for example, like the equipment packages, if they did a canopy tent, like that would automatically come toward your media because there's no way to split up a canopy tent.
Right.
It's one thing. But then once, so if it's equipment stuff, that will come directly to the program. If it was more of a, say, a $10,000 donation, then trying to figure out what percentage of that basically comes to the digital comm warrior media budget, what percent of that would go to athletics, what percent of that would go to school store or the business program, trying to figure out how to divvy up that pie each time that amount comes in. So I think that's more in the cash donation versus an in-kind or an equipment package donation.
Right.
Where some businesses, like Sandy said, some businesses may say, I definitely want to sponsor a tent, or I want to make sure I know where my money's going. It's going toward that camera, that I see on the sideline, something like that, where they'd be more. And some people would like, just give me $1,000, do whatever you want with it, and so then you could potentially support it that way.
And those would be, again, PA announcements or like a video board. Thank you to our sponsors that, these are all the cash donations.
Yeah.
We don't have to specify how much, we can just allude to, your partnership. And did we decide did we kind of talk about a percentage? I thought we did.
Yeah, I think Aaron was working on what percentage he would need to come to athletics, what percent I would need. I think Steve Summers too, we were going to talk.
yeah, so there's gonna be a budget conversation. And then I would say from a committee standpoint, I've got to check in with Randy and Steve. I'm thinking probably budget or co-curricular may have a stop in front of them. I know, and Ted, you probably know more than I do, but, we have policy on advertising. We know we need to update it. We think there is consensus to support updating it. So we feel like Sandra's class can complete their work and begin putting things out in front of potential community partners. But we will need to follow behind that before the fall season and update the advertising policy. But we have time to do that.
And there are two, they have this package.
I don't think so.
That was the one I sent you. Is that?
I don't, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna make a Xerox copy
I
of
might
it.
have extra copies. Hold
You got
on.
extra copies?
I got 1, 2, 3. Yep.
Yeah.
4.
Awesome, thank you.
Handouts class. At the back of this, I've got some examples of, I just took screenshots. One is the Mount Horeb stream that Mount Horeb does. One is Beaver Dam stream, and one is Oregon stream. And then I think the advertisement, it's like business cards. I think that's off the Beaver Dam stream. So there's a number of ways to do it on the stream. For example, Mount Horeb has little, they basically fill their corners. They put the corners with the little logos for businesses, and that could potentially change every game, change every half, and then they also, like Norris Golf Club, it's like a major sponsor, so they get right next to the scoreboard. Then they have their Wisco radio there. Beaver Dam does something similar with their kind of elaborate scoreboard at the bottom with Columbus Family Dental. And then Beaver Dam or Oregon does something too, kind of right next to their scoreboard. And then during halftime, we'd like to thank our sponsors, and that some of these were actual commercials that say the Columbus Family Dental, like, hey, come get your teeth cleaned, the Columbus Family Dental, blah, 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 blah. And some of them were just, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Richard Insurance, Kevin Carnine from American Family. And so there's a lot of different ways, again, to kind of advertise it, even on the live stream, to be able to do that, whether we do it, pregame, halftime, postgame, do it just at halftime, we do it all three. You have your book, you have your little logo up there the whole game,
So Sandra, I don't know if I understood it correctly with the course you're working, I know they go through the whole process, creating commercials. Will they actually be creating commercials for the sponsors, or that will be up to them, or?
We don't know what the sponsor wants their message to be, so we don't want to create a commercial for them. If they
Okay.
want the commercial, they can create it and provide it to us.
Got it.
What we're doing in my class is creating the tangibles that we can send out, that this is why you want to partner with us. We're selling ourselves
Sure,
through
sure.
those tangibles.
So you're doing the marketing part, not the creativity part.
It's like a couple of years ago, like Carlos Scott's son sent us we want this to run August and September, so it's like a sale. Then we want this to run October, November. So we had 2 different commercials that we ran. And so it'd be things like that too, where it's like,
Yeah.
you send us the commercial that you would like to do,
Right.
and have out there that you get professionally made, and then we'll display it however.
There are schools that do have commercials, like their marketing class creates the commercial. I'm not saying that we could never do that. We're just not at that level yet. The last thing that I want to talk about, which I would also like to do, and the kids would like to do it, is the sponsorship selling infomercial project. So if you
Second
could,
from the bottom.
yep, if you could open it up, for me, please.
Yeah.
Yes.
And, yeah.
So this is something that I used to do in marketing too, but it wasn't a sponsorship package. It was like, they could choose a product or a service, and then they would create an infomercial for it. And it would be, 5 to 8 minutes, something like that. I think it would be really cool to not only have the tangibles, the visual, but have the kids create an infomercial that's between 8 and 10 minutes, where they have camera, angles, because you teach that in mass media. And, they had these classes, and they could go in and show, like, here's our field house, and, like, your logo could go here, and talk about the cool things that we do as a school, because we are leaders in a lot of different ways, not just athletics. We're leaders in curriculum, we're leaders in numbers, as we saw before. And if you scroll down to the next page, those would be the requirements that I would do with the students. So they would have different roles, like a director, a video technician, a main character. This would be the person of the face of Waunakee. And then the producer, they would have to provide a detailed script and a storyboard. So they have to think logically and plan it out. 4 years ago, I was part of the Select Enterprises commercial for the Bucky books on TV. Talk about, like, stressful. Every time that commercial would come on, my kids would be like, Mom, you're famous. And I'm like, that was a huge process. Like, they did an hour and a half's worth of takes. I learned so much with what goes into a 10 to 15 second commercial. So this would kind of be similar to that. There's obviously some requirements, 7 to 10 minutes, has to be, sponsorship driven. They would go out onto Warrior Stadium and, see the board if no one's ever been to Warrior Stadium before. It would just be a really cool thing for them to do. They could interview, like Jason and he could talk about the live stream. Like, it would be an opportunity for them. We would do 2 infomercials. Right. So I only have 11 kids in the class, and they would break up into 2 different groups, and then they would put together not only the spec sheet, but they would also do the infomercial. This would be 125 points. It would be part of their grade. And then it would be something that we could send out to potential sponsors as well.
Anything else for Sandra and Jason?
Thanks, pretty cool.
Great work. Thanks for spending your day with us. And keep up the great work with our kids.
Okay, I think that brings us to 7 textbooks. Cool.
Yes, so there is one change we need to update you on since the last meeting, which relates to the foundation's adoption. And I can go over that verbally, but then this is Amy's area, so she can do a deeper dive on it. That is that the adoption process that Amy has been leading has come to a decision. She's going to share that. When the dust settles, that 113,000 estimate has bumped north by a little over 10,000. So basically, that line goes up by 10,000, almost about $10,400, and then that would increase the bottom line range by the same amount. So we would just take that back and mark pursuant to kind of what you brought up at the last meeting around trying to do some reallocation so we could make the better long-term purchase on a 3-year basis for GoMath. We'll take that back to Steve and Allie and work with them on that.
Okay.
But you probably want to know, the big news on the foundation's adoption. And so Amy, walk us through where things landed.
Well, it landed just, as I had proposed in the past. So we just had the teacher pilot meeting in between our last 2 meetings. So they decided that they would like to recommend the adoption. The difference is that the Haggerty resources, even though the publication date was very recent already, 2020, they do have an updated version of 2022. So that means we can't use the pilot materials that we have now. So that's why it went up a little bit in price, just because we want to get the most recent edition. But it's still the Wilson Foundation's that's listed there. It's just a new edition.
And the foundations would be kindergarten through 2nd grade.
Right, so these are those early, you can see on the left column there, it's K2 foundational skills, so it's kind of those early literacy skills that phonics and support are.
So does that include licensing for whiteboard, instruction or whatever, or examples?
Some of
Or is
some of
that
it does have some whiteboard,
Yeah.
materials, but a lot of the pilot teachers use their document cameras
Sure,
and
sure.
things like that. So,
Okay.
but it does have some of that. The foundations does.
So we need to wait for one more set of numbers, or are we?
No, I think we are good to go
Okay.
for a motion to bring into the regular meeting in May. And then we would work with Steve and Allie to achieve the higher end of that range that would allow us to buy GoMath on a 3-year basis, which over the 3 years is the most cost-effective way versus buying it 1 year at a time.
Someone care to make a proposal, or do we have questions before I go forward?
So I would move to accept the textbooks as presented.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. So the next item, we're kind of on a journey talking about instructional resources, classroom activities, how controversial or potentially controversial topics are addressed in the classroom. And when we connected on this last month, our goal for this meeting was to come back and review our existing policies in this area. And so, Rebecca, if you can bring up that relevant policies on resources and activities. There are 5 policies that touch most closely in this area. And they're linked for your review and also for members of our public that are watching in Board Book. If you cruise to there, these are live links. You can find the relevant policies in our district policy manual. And certainly we welcome any questions or clarification questions you may have for us. So there are 5. And as is the case with many of our policies, they haven't been revised all that recently. Most of them were revised last in 2002. One was revised in 2008. But the first one, 361, if you could bring that up, Rebecca, this is our textbook selection and adoption. And I think the key piece here is this is just the intent of what guides the process that leads to the types of elements that you were just approving for the future. There's not a lot on here that really speaks to the opt-out, but it's important to kind of understand what your policy is that kind of shapes the selection of materials. Then Rebecca, if we go back in the agenda to 362, instructional materials selection. This again gets into the process of how we select materials, levels of difficulty, diversity of appeal, presentation of different points of view. We recently received a question from a parent and member of the public about reading levels. There are a lot of ways we think about reading levels. Some of them are very calculated based on kind of formulas of text readability, and those have very significant limitations, but what calculations like a Flesch-Kincaid or a Lexile score give you is the ability to draw some rough comparisons between different types of texts. And so certainly that's something that we look at, a little less in terms of matching the reader to the material in a positive sense, because a student who has, so typically one of the things you look for in readability is the complexity or length of the sentence. Another thing is how common is the word. So if you're not interested, in example, in meteorology, if you pick up a nonfiction text on meteorology and it's not your area of interest, that could be a very challenging text. But if you're a student, even one that might not necessarily profile as a highly advanced reader, but that student has a passion for meteorology and already knows the terminology, then those words which might cause that text to score at an advanced level because it'll involve maybe a scientific term that's not commonly used for the student, they're familiar with it because it's an area of interest for them. So we know that kids can, in areas of interest, read well above kind of their calculated grade level in many cases. But what something like a Lexile score does is it gives the teacher or a parent, if a parent's working on a summer book list, something to pause and think about to avoid a big mismatch, or to say, well, this seems to be a gap between, what I believe my child's grade level, reading level is and the complexity of the text. Is this something they're really interested in? If it's really interesting to them, it's probably going to work out just fine. But if it's, because again, when they run into a tough word, they might be motivated to go to a dictionary, whether it's a traditional dictionary or online, look it up and kind of self-develop their vocabulary. But if it's a topic that's not interesting to the student, they might not be self-motivated. I'm kind of detouring off this, but just, again, as we do look at materials, this is certainly something our teachers keep in mind. And the other thing to keep in mind here is some of this relates to textbooks. Some of this also relates to the work of our library media specialists and collection development in the library media centers. So if we could go to the next one, which is 362.1, this relates to the use of rated films and AV materials. The fact that we're talking about films and AV materials in this language, I think, speaks to the retro nature of this policy, but we still show media in the classrooms. And so these are our guidelines. Now, I think it's important to note that this was last, I think, revised in 2008, and it's probably overdue for review, both in terms of the type of media for language, and also to make sure that there haven't been any meaningful changes to what constitutes a PG-13 rating today versus 2008, because these are industry standards. They do shift with the times, but these are the guidelines if a teacher wants to show media that folks should be utilizing. And you'll notice that there's a parent guardian approval depending on the level in terms of rating and also the age of the student.
So Tim,
Yes.
if I'm showing a film of some sort in a classroom, then am I expected to get that information out to all the parents of my students so they have a choice to opt out of it?
Not if it's G rated.
Okay, but anything above the G rating,
Anything above a G rating needs parental notification.
okay?
In some
And it
way.
also it says something about must be approved by the principal. So I'm
Yeah.
assuming if it's approved 1 year, you don't have to go back. You can keep using that?
Yes.
Okay, for example, I know English one, they use Romeo and Juliet for one of their. Okay, but so are teachers aware that they have to request permission for anything that they haven't shown previously? Or does that get lost in the creativity of the planning?
So I am fairly certain this is part, along with issues like copyright and others that are part of our annual packet of notifications that folks need to review. I think we have somebody. And so they should. If there's a concern this might not be happening, I think the first place to take this is, again, the person closest to the topic, which would be the teacher, and then to the principal. But this is indeed our framework for this.
Okay.
Right, so if you had gone to Brian Borowski and had a version of Romeo and Juliet approved last year, you don't need to come back to him on it. And if it all depends on the version of Romeo and Juliet, you have to kind of look at this.
Sure. All right. Thanks.
Now, if we could go, and I'm going to bring this up here. If we could go to 81. So I'll be back to saving this.
You want me to take over?
After I bring this one up, you are the driver. This is teaching about controversial issues. And again, this is our district's philosophical statement on it, last revisited by the board about 20 years ago. And again, there's not an opt-out provision simply because something's controversial, but this does discuss the complaint process here. And the last thing I would like us to look at for today, and there'll be more next meeting, is 871, which is the public complaints about the curriculum or instructional materials. And as we're getting ready for this meeting, Randy and I were reflecting that it is kind of a unique aspect of our policy manual in the district that something related to the curriculum is actually in the 800 series. It's something for us to kind of look at for the future. However, this does get into, again, the complaint process. This is really the book challenge process first and foremost. And again, this is something where our library media team has been working on updating it for more contemporary language since it was last touched in 2002. So these are the high level things with instructional materials. Now, at our next meeting, we'll be bringing in the policies that talk about specific topics. So what is our policy on human growth and development, AODA, hygiene? We do have another set of policies that go beyond just instructional materials in general, that get down to specific topics in the classroom where parents do have an ability to opt out, where parents can opt out in part, but then there's a substitution process, and where there really is not an opt-out component. And so just to kind of chunk it up, instead of to bury you with like 10 policies, we've done kind of the higher level ones on like the resources here, and we'll come back next month with the ones on specific topics. So, and then I think once you've seen both sets, then we can kind of step back and kind of get your feedback on, you know, what more information do you want to be brought in? I mean, we're getting deeper into a very comprehensive relook of all of our policies. And so I think this is timely from that perspective as well.
Thanks for putting it together.
To be continued.
Yep.
So.
But I covered a lot. I think you covered clearly enough the concern we've heard about Lexiles. It's just one of many guides to judge the value of a book and what it does and how it can be used. As I was reading the policies, it really gave me comfort in the guidance the district has provided for selecting and using these materials. And if there is a concern about it, you know, what's the protocol to get to it? I'm just wondering how sometimes we can communicate the volume info we have that would sometimes be helpful to the community. And I don't have an answer for that. It's just, you know, but if I'm a parent and I have a concern about a piece, you know, it's in the policy, but is there a way to get them kind of a snapshot view of some of those things so that to help guide them before it becomes a huge issue?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point you bring up, Mark. I mean, I think from two perspectives in particular, as I think about it. You know, one is, you know, I think we have a pretty sound set of policies, but the communication is an important element. You know, really, when we think about children in school, there are two sets of experts, you know, in terms of the skills and concepts, whether they're in the academic space or, you know, some of the employability skills or social emotional learning skills. You have educators who bring a lot of professional expertise to it. Then you also have individual students, and you have the conversations go in individual households, and that's where parents bring their own expertise into their child and their household. And so how do we create good and harmonious communication across those two branches of expertise to the maximum benefit of the children? So I think there's that element. I think also something we engaged in some prior to the pandemic, and I know Annie's been looking at this some as well, is we had some engagement with parent groups in each school around what would they like to see in terms of parent engagement and communication. And there is feedback for us. Some feedback we've been able to move forward on. Others we still have to do. But I know one thing we certainly heard was, and parents get accustomed, so let's hear an elementary parent. You get accustomed to how your child's elementary school operates. Then it's time for your oldest child to move up to the intermediate school. It's your first child in the intermediate school. It's an undiscovered country to you. You don't know how communication works. You don't know what are the events that's really important. What are the most key events as a parent or a guardian to show up for? What's kind of the 101 of the intermediate school? And that process replicates itself as your child moves up to the middle school and then to the high school. So we definitely heard that there was an interest from parents in just an introduction to the school. How do you go about getting information? What are the key events for parents at schools? And if you have a question, what's the process for getting your questions addressed at that school? And that's a recommendation we haven't, pulled together in practice yet, but we know it's a desire on the part of parents, and I think that would also help with the communication process. We'll come back to this again.
I think that takes us to preliminary opt-out numbers.
Yeah, so back in the fall, when Amy and I provided our student progress update, we promised that we would come back with our opt-out numbers, because you remember last year opt-outs were very high. And so most of our state testing is done, but the window isn't closed yet. And in truth, a parent can opt their child out at any point in the window. It doesn't happen often, but I have known occasions where a student has started the ELA test and forward, and the parents opted them out midway through. So we're just kind of stopped the test, and there we would go. But as of last week, and if you could just click on that very briefly, Rebecca, this is where we were at. And what I've done is in this table, I have our enrollments, and I have how many opt-out requests were submitted by parents at each grade level for the forward, the Aspire, and the ACT. And where that number of opt-outs is above 5%, I've highlighted the box. And so you can see that really our test participation has really recovered very nicely up through 7th grade. Beginning in 8th grade, though, we have a little over a 10% opt-out rate. And then for 10th grade and 9th grade, we see higher opt-out rates, with it getting to about the 30% rate by the time we get to 10th grade. Now, the impact here isn't on the state report card. It will show our test participation rates, but the state report card will be for information only. There is a federal accountability report card. You do see that when it comes out. It doesn't attract the same attention as the state report cards. But in the federal system, your academic calculations are based on at least a 95% participation rate. So if your school had a greater than 95% participation rate, your academic results will use the real denominator of the participating students. But if your participation rate goes below 95%, in the federal calculation, your denominator will be 95% of your enrollment. So if you had 70% of your kids, participate, your denominator is still going to be held at 95%. So the score, the assessment-driven scores that calculate towards your federal index will be reduced where you have higher opt-outs. Now, our schools start from very high levels. I think it's very unlikely it would tip us into a federal accountability situation where we would have a state improvement plan, but it will definitely show up in our ratings, particularly for the high school and a little bit for the middle school. So,
Tim, this can't be unique to us, so is it?
It's not unique to us, where unique means we're the only ones, but our community is definitely in a minority within the state for lower test participation. Most districts do not have numbers like this. Most numbers, the numbers you see for elementary,
Right.
carry all the way through high school.
So for the sake of the public understanding, the forward test is the state test,
Yes.
whereas the Aspires at PSAT.
So the Aspire is part of the state assessment system at 9th and 10th grade. And then the ACT is part of the state assessment system at 11th grade. But those are tested or administered nationally, whereas the Forward is tuned specifically for Wisconsin.
Did we have opt-outs like this before the pandemic?
We saw elevated opt-outs, not this bad. I can go back. Once we close the books on this testing window, I can bring in the multi-year trend
That would be nice.
so you
to
can
see.
see, Joan.
Yeah.
And I think, again, I'm not going to sit here and claim that these
Right.
tests are the most authentic and relevant exhibitions of student
Exactly.
mastery.
Yeah. we
Yeah.
have to.
However, the two things I will say are, we are a publicly funded school district. One of the ways that state and federal authorities seek to understand how the taxpayer dollars are being spent is on test performance, because it's something that can be done across the state and across the nation. And so this is a string that comes attached with public funding. The other thing I would observe, and this is really for high school parents that may be watching this, is the Forward exam, we break up into little chunks, but as you know, we do late starts. So the Aspire assessments are longer duration assessments. They're probably the longest duration assessment your child will sit for until they take the ACT or an advanced placement exam. Now you'll notice that we don't have high opt-outs for the ACT. And our kids who take AP classes tend to take the AP exams. And, I was talking with one of our AP teachers a few weeks ago, and, we do believe that we have kids who, when they get opted out of the Aspire, really the first time that they take an AP test, which is a 3-hour continuous test, that's the longest test experience they've had at a single sitting. And we'll see kids that in the practice test in class that are broken up into chunks, because we can't replicate a 3-hour experience during the regular school day. So we chunk up the practice tests if you're in A-Push or AP Bio. We'll have kids that do fine on those smaller duration chunked out practice tests, but when they get to the 3-hour environment, it's new. And for some of them, they struggle. And so I guess what I would say is, if performance on the ACT or AP exams is important to your child or important to you as a parent, it's probably in your interest to have them sit for the 9th and 10th grade Aspire just to get experience having that longer duration test event. So I just put that out there.
From my experience, and I left in 2008, so things may have changed, but I don't think there was a great effort to market the test. It's just an obligation that you have to go through.
Mhm.
And, the Forward test, you could say, well, it's the state trying to look at it so that there's some kind of meaning, but I don't think the kids see meaning for themselves. The Aspire provides a lot of information in post-high school plans, I think.
Mhm.
So I don't know, maybe we've gotten to the point that rather than just Forward tests are going to be, the Aspire test is going to be, try to market a little bit to the families, weeks before the test, so that maybe, of the importance and the value it may have.
Mhm. Yeah, I think historically we've tried not to, parents have the right to opt out.
Sure.
So we feel it's our obligation to advise them of that, but we certainly don't market opting out. But you're right, Mark. We also don't heavily market the test participation. We kind of expect that people will show up and do it. But we may be at the point where we may need to do some more presentation of information on that, just because, one, the report on the federal accountability, but also I am a little concerned for some of our high school kids that not having these low stakes, long test experiences, then they get to a higher stakes exam for the first time, And sometimes, it's the step up isn't an easy one for them. And so that's a concern for us. We'll bring back the multi-year and we can talk more about how to kind of raise awareness. So.
I think that brings us to planning for the next meeting.
Yeah, and for the next meeting, we will bring back more on the instructional resources policies, and we'll get into those actual topics. And it's interesting to look at the policies we have governing these. I mean, I think the things we hear about the most are human growth and development and sexuality. There are other areas that are involved. So, I mean, if you haven't looked at these in a while, I think you will find the next meeting of interest. And actually, there's one area that Chris Mann and I have talked about where I'm not sure our policies are in complete agreement. We have one policy that reads one way that might not quite mesh with another. So we probably should have a conversation about that. And then by then I could bring in the multi-year pieces, the test participation. I also think we'll have a look at our chair and coordinator recruitment for the 3-year terms that are up this year.
Okay, Tim, in our last meeting, with regards to the supplemental resources and their instructional role,
Mhm.
you had mentioned that at some point we get a report from whatever the administration was doing for a guideline.
Yes. I'm not sure we'll have it ready by your next meeting.
Okay, I was just going to ask, do you have an idea of how far down the line that might be? June, possibly?
I think June's quite possible. We have to bring it through cabinet. And we
Okay.
haven't done that yet.
All
And
right.
I think depending on how extensive the feedback is from cabinet, it could be a really direct to committee. But if the feedback's more extensive, then we might have to take a few weeks and bring it back to cabinet and then.
So has that been done strictly administratively, or has there been a teacher voice in that too?
It's been through several iterations of system-wide. At this stage, I would say there's been more teacher leader voice on it than administrative voice, which is why we need to bring it to cabinet.
Good. All right. All right, motion to
Second.
all in favor?
Thank you.